Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's edition of the Sunday Wire. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We're streaming out live on the Alternate Current Radio Network, also at 21stCenturyWire.com, streaming out live on X, Rumble, also YouTube, Facebook, and BitChute as well. Thank you for joining us on this live stream. This is episode 529 of this weekly Omnibus News and Analysis radio program. We have another fantastic episode for you this week. Merry Christmas to everybody. Hope you've had a great holiday break. We had a fantastic show last week with a great interview with Syrian Girl. You can go back and check out our archives on that. Really stunning interview with her. We're going to follow that up with something even more interesting this week. We had a couple of great discussions we're going to have first in the guest interview segment here, and also in overdrive afterwards, after the break this week on the Sunday Wire. We're going to be talking about Syria. We're going to try to unpack Syria, and the conversation is going to end up drifting over to Russia and Ukraine for obvious reasons. And you'll know after we hear from our guest. He is a journalist and author. He's also a political consultant who has extensive experience in the Middle East, in Syria and Iraq, and other places internationally. His name is Arnaud Develay. He's going to be joining us right now for a discussion on a really important topic, a great development in terms of global politics. Arnaud Develay, thank you for joining us this week on the Sunday Wire.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Always a pleasure.
No, the pleasure is ours, and I'm sure this is going to be an interesting discussion today, Arnaud. And firstly, give us a chance to get to know you a little bit for our new viewers who aren't familiar with your work. You can check out Arnaud's archive up at 21stCenturyWire.com. Some of his work and interviews are there, Arnaud, but just give us a little brief description of yourself, what you do, and your main areas of interest.
Well, I was trained as an attorney in the US, and rather than go on an externship and make coffee in a real estate firm in Florida, I decided, in the wake of the patently illegal US invasion of Iraq back in 2003, to get in touch with the people who were at the time in charge of the defense of the deposed president of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, for those who might not be sure about who I'm talking about. And so I traveled to Amman, Jordan, to meet the head of the team, introduced myself, and later on we were actually joined by former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark, with whom I developed a somewhat close mentorship, disciple relationship. Learned a lot from him. We ended up working on a lot of other issues in the following years. And I got involved into the Syrian theater, obviously, owing to my experience in Iraq, since I quickly emerged that this was they were all part of the same pattern. And I started visiting the country in 2017. I went back in 2019 for a series of conferences there in Aleppo, Damascus, Aleppo, Latakia, Tartus, and Sweda, which allowed us to really get to see the diversity of what Syria was, or should we say is still all about, albeit in a very uncertain future now. And I went back. The last time I went there was in early 2020, and it turned out that this was the same moment the COVID-19 situation came up. And so they closed the border, and I ended up staying about 2.5 years there before relocating to Moscow and starting working on the Ukraine conflict. I have a book that came out last April on the Biden clan's misgiving, or should we say, shenanigans in Ukraine, dating back to 2014. Just came out last April, published in Clarity Press, from the ground, being on the ground.
Flashed a little image of your book there, Foreign Entanglements, really unpacking the Biden corruption scandals in Ukraine, Democratic Party, deeply entrenched in a lot of the corruption in Ukraine. You've uncovered and exposed a lot of that in your book. Subsequently, a lot of this is also out in the public domain through various investigations, including congressional investigations into the matter. So I think you've been very much vindicated by your work on this topic, Arnaud. Very important work to do with Ukraine. On the issue of Syria, your trips to Syria, you mentioned, we've just got a few images here. Arnaud, just tell us about this photograph.
This was in Latakia after the conference, and so we basically walked through the day-to-day reality of Syrians living on the coast. Those people today are useless to say, bearing the brunt of retaliatory raids in this part of the country. Many Christians live there, and many Alawite, which for our viewer was the community, the sect, as they said over there, out of which the former president came from. But as was very rightly so described and explained by in one of the articles published on your site by former UK Ambassador Peter Ford, the Alawites were not on easy street by any stretch of the imagination. It is actually a complete misconception to believe that just because the Assad clan was issued from the Alawite community, that the whole community was somewhat rolling in Rolls Royce. Nothing could be further from the truth. Suffice it to say that the Alawite is a kind of a very obscure spin-off of Shia Islam. Most of them really brought themselves up through Syrian society after having been ostracized for literally centuries, fleeing persecution, taking refuge in the mountains by the coast, where they were able to hide initially. And during the French Mandate, all the way through the coup-marred era between 1946 and 1963, they were really like at the bottom of the pecking order in Syria until the advent of the founding president of modern Syria, Hafez al-Assad, who basically completely transformed the country and brought it into this kind of secular country, bringing together a mosaic of different community, and while acknowledging the religious dimensions of the people living there, the constitution was that people are first and foremost defined as being Syrians and not Christians or Sunni. Although it might have appeared on their ID cards, they were not defined by their religious background. This was at the core of the Ba'athist Pan-Arabic model of governance. Ba'athism in Arabic means rebirth. Was actually some gist of it was actually thought out by a French guy, whom I forgot his name, but his idea of nominalism was borrowed by Michel Aflaq, who was the person who was I think he was a Lebanese Christian, and he's the one who basically theorized for the Arab world how this could work. And so we saw some of it in obviously the Arab nationalism was very on the up and up in the late 50s, early 60s with Nasser in Egypt, and then it expressed itself in Iraq. later on through the Iraqi branch of the Ba'ath. But there were also branches of the Ba'ath in Jordan, for instance. When we were working on the case in Iraq, we were working out of Amman for security reasons. And we were under, pretty much, I wouldn't say under protection per se, but somewhat, logistically provided by the Jordanian branch of the Ba'ath. And some of the people there actually used to work and do a lot of round trips between Amman and Baghdad back in the day. And so, and obviously there's the Syrian branch. So a lot of people have been trying to draw a dividing line between the Ba'athist experience in Iraq and versus Syria. Whereupon in Iraq there was more of an openness to market economy, whereas in Syria it was more of a state-controlled economy, owing to I guess the logic of the blocks prevailing at the time. Iraq, as we know, was for quite some time ensconced in the US-led Euro-NATO bloc. We don't have to go back to the Iraq-Iran war, but Iraq was essentially, said so several times, the Ukraine of that time, trying to, as a proxy being used to contain the Iranian Islamic Revolution, with, all the disaster that this led to, and which probably prompted the former president to somewhat act rashly in 1990 when he decided to go and get repaid for what he assumed, what he claimed was at the time a debt owed by the Gulf states, who had used him to preserve their fiefdoms. Whereas Syria was always more in the Soviet orbit, going back to the 1970s, 60s, but especially 1970s, when we talk, and we are likely to hear about it in the coming days and coming weeks. When we talk about the issue of the Russian bases on the Syrian coast, for instance, suffice it to say that there were already Soviet bases at the time. Not two. There was Tartus, as a port was there. Nemin was not installed yet, but there was a Russian port there. Yes. So there was always a very close-knit, symbiotic almost relationship between the old guard of the Syrian Ba'athist and the Soviet elite. Many of the Syrian order member of the Ba'ath, for instance, they all studied in Moscow. And a lot of the political culture that one sees in Syria actually has its roots in Soviet Russia. So it's interesting to see that dichotomy. Suffice it to say, unfortunately, that the era of Pan-Arabism seems to be coming to an end with what was the events of last December 7th. And so we're finding now ourselves in a kind of a crossroad. We don't really know what the future will be made of, but things would appear to look bleak, to put it mildly.
And just going back to coincidentally, I'll bring this photo from Latakia. I'm not sure what year this was. I'm guessing this was
in early 2019.
2019, and in the forefront there is Daria Dugina, the late daughter of Alexander Dugin. She was attendee of that conference that you were there as well. I mean, she, what was her feelings with Syria? Do you remember? Did you have discussions with her about Syria, and was she a country that she loved, that she enjoyed visiting?
Well, actually, I was approached to assemble a delegation at the time, and we were somewhat pressed for time, and from one thing led to another, and I was provided with contact details. So I called her up, and I was somewhat plainly explaining to her what we were trying to do, and I asked her if she would be interested in joining. And she was immediately enthused, She had never been there. She was very curious, very lively. She had a whole range of talent, not just as a politolog, but also as a writer, as a poet, as a thinker, as a philosopher. And to be honest, she's the one who ended up becoming the head, what do we call it, the lead of our delegation, because she had that aura about her, and the Syrian people immediately took to her, and she quickly became this kind of phenomenon, to be honest, and that led us, in the end, completely unexpectedly, to be informed one morning, a couple of days away from our departure back to our respective destinations, that we will be going to the palace and meet the president. And obviously, this was quite unexpected. The president was a busy man, obviously. But I guess the feedback from the series of conferences had reached all the way to the head of the executive, and it was deemed valuable, to reinforce what already were strong ties with Russia, and having the daughter of Alexander Dugin in Syria, generating such a positive response from the population was something that probably played a big role in things playing out that way.
Yeah, and also in addition, we have just a photo here. If I'm not mistaken, is this the Grand Mufti in
Yes,
Damascus?
that's right. This was in early 2020, so after COVID started. As it turned out, the position of the Grand Mufti was, I wouldn't say abolished, but transformed about a year and a half later, and turned into a kind of an assembly of experts. So this was one of the last times, I guess, especially owing to the conditions prevailing at the time, with the borders being closed, where he was gracious to receive us, and basically explain to us the harmonious nature of relationship between different religious communities, with the idea that everything that had been sold to the Western public in terms of sectarian strife between Sunni and Shia was but a construct aimed at driving a wedge among those societies, who, up until the moment when they became a target of the Western governments, were living in complete harmony. I mean, there was never any. This never even came to be an issue to begin with. People were living in their cocoon, and I think of Syria, the old Syria. I'm already using that term, old Syria, as this kind of. I wouldn't say Camelot, obviously. I wouldn't want to be, but there was this kind of something that will most likely never happen again. With all its shortcoming, they had somehow created something that was quite unique, not only in the Middle East, but I would say in the world. There was no Huntington way of thinking there, and at the same time, it was transcended and sublimated by the rich history of the country, with some of the main cities going back thousands of years, having seen empires and invasions come and go throughout the centuries. I mean, just think about the Umayyad Mosque, for instance, which
We got a picture of
is,
that up on. I think you supplied us with a picture here. Is this that mosque that we have?
that's right.
Okay.
So it's right near the main souk of Damascus, and it's quite a sight to behold. And it contains within it. So, I mean, just for people who never got the chance to visit Syria, the head of John the Baptist So the person who baptized the Christ, as well as the head of Hussein, which is the grandson of Muhammad, the prophet of Islam. And right outside the mosque, you have the tomb of Saladin, the person who vanquished the Crusaders. And at the same time, if you travel about a couple of hours north of the capital on the way to Homs, you will get to visit the Crac des Chevaliers, which is probably the most well preserved Crusader fortress in the whole region, bar none. And so you have all those different layers of Levant history, I would say, by extension, world history, all condensed in that very small place called Syria. And it's obviously the governments at the time were not only for touristical purpose, but they considered themselves as kind of the keepers of all those sites. Obviously, I'm not going to forget Palmyra, although it was captured twice during the fighting war years between, let's say, between 2012 and 2016. It was liberated a second time in 2016, which goes back to Roman times. It was the stronghold of Queen Zenobia, who, by all account, was, who could give a run for her money to Cleopatra, among one of the strong female figure in antiquity. And Palmyra was probably able to rival Petra in the Nabatean city of Petra in Jordan back in the days with those caravan spice routes. And so all this echoes at the same time this idea about the BRICS that we talk about these days so much about. And the BRICS was supposed to, Syria was supposed to join the BRICS. President Assad had expressed that much. For the time being, all this is somewhat up in the air now. But yeah, Syria was all that and more. And of course, how could one forget the sheer hospitality of those people? Their resiliency. Never complaining about anything, always predisposed to give you whatever few things they possessed, as a token of hospitality, which is one of the fundamental staple in the region. So we are like light years away from this kind of self-loathing that we hear all too often in the West in that sense.
Well, that brings us to the present moment, and thank you for that background. I think that was really important, Arnaud, just to kind of for the audience, whoever, to establish your relationship with Syria personally and your experience there, and what it means to you. Reflecting back on it, as a political entity, as a state, as a culture, as a society, and then, as you said, on December 7th and 8th of 2024. Not only a few weeks ago, in fact, the unthinkable happened. The unthinkable happened, and the black flag was flying over Aleppo, and days later over Damascus. And since then, the world has watched in wonderment, many in horror, at the HTS, Hayat al-Sham, and Al-Qaeda in Syria. Dare we call it a regime? Are we allowed to call it a regime? Let's call it a regime, because the West is calling this a government now. It's still a listed terrorist organization, and everybody's talking about the fall of the House of Assad, or the Assad dynasty. And it didn't take long, Arnaud, before Israel certainly took advantage of the situation. In fact, in a matter of hours, they began bombing and liquidating all of Syria's military installations, all of the Air Force bases, including the Syrian naval port, all of their naval assets. and then moved in to occupy the Golan Heights and now Mount Hermon. So now have tactical artillery advantage over large parts of Lebanon and even Damascus. I mean, that was unthinkable just months ago, that they would have never been able to capture this territory and have this level of military advantage over Syria and now over the region in many ways. The Israel and the U.S. have transformed the situation with the help of HTS and Al Qaeda coming down, invading from Turkey, with the full backing of the Turkish state and the full backing, let's be honest, of the United States, Britain, all the NATO allies, and seem to be strategically coordinating with Israel, even right to the last couple of weeks, with allowing Israel, standing down, admitting they're in coordination with Israel. So, I mean, Arnaud, this is just like an extraordinary confluence of events, and it's very strange. On one hand, it's being portrayed by pundits, many pundits in the region, including the Cradle and other publications like this, more realistic publications, as this kind of massive betrayal of Syria as a country, and really possibly betrayal of the Arabic region, if you want to call it the Arabic states in the region. But the mainstream media is still talking about this was some sort of necessary regime change in order to, it's almost like a continuation of the Arab Spring. I really feel like they're really trying to reboot the Arab Spring vibe in the region, somehow a continuation of that. I mean, what do you make, first of all, your thoughts, your feelings and reactions about the fall of Syria, and then going forward, what do you see in the short term, at least? We'll talk about the mid and the long term, but in terms of the situation now, I want to get your thoughts on that, Arnaud.
Well, obviously, a lot has been already said, and it's somewhat understandable that people's emotion get the best of them, to the extent they might have felt they had a bone in this fight. In a way, Syria, the way I look at it, in the context of, as you mentioned, the Arab Spring or the Greater Middle East Initiative, whichever way you want to look at it, it's all part of the same plan, or the Odeid-Yinon plan going back to 1982. They all interweave into each other. The idea being that if we address the Yinon plan, was to dismantle every coherent Arab state in the region so as to promote Israeli geostrategic interests there. So then fast forward to 9/11, we have the 7 countries in 5 years speech by Wesley Clark. And Syria figured pretty high on the list. And so we might have all thought for a few years at least that the tide had be turned somehow, that there was a sense of containment, having found its full expression in the ancient land of Syria. But it's to somewhat underestimate how the West proceeds. They may experience ad hoc, somewhat temporary setbacks, but they don't give up. If we look at the situation when the Syrian army and its Russian and Iranian and Hezbollah allies were liberating provinces one after the other. I'm talking about starting from the liberation of East Aleppo in December 2016, which really turned the tide right there, going through October 2017 with the liberation of Deir ez-Zor and this somewhat almost Hollywood-made, script of, you had this Syrian Druze general Zareddin, Issam Zareddin, who was this kind of larger-than-life figure, holding Colts on each side and standing up a little bit like Colonel Kilgore in Apocalypse Now, And he held for 3 years with about 150 guys against like thousands and thousands of militants, going at them, suicide, kamikaze type, and just being, maintained through air supply, air convoy, supplies being dropped. So when the Syrian Arab Army led the way and re-established a junction with Deir ez-Zor, that was something that really. I was in Maalula when that happened in so late September, early October. I think Deir ez-Zor was liberated on October 3rd. And there was such a elation in Maalula. Maalula is a Christian town, so you see, I mean, it's nothing to do with, it was just something. Everybody partook in this, and there was so much optimism, so much energy. It was electrifying. People were shooting in the air, walking down the narrow streets of this ancient town. It's about 100 kilometers west of Damascus. One or two remaining places in the world where the language of Christ is still spoken, and people were just celebrating. And we were actually at the same time not far after the yearly celebration of the Feast of the Cross, where you have on one side you have a mountain with the Catholic, and then the other mountain with the Orthodox, and you have this kind of little, somewhat good-spirited tug of war between the two, and it was just kind of like a succession of good news after, everybody remembered the town being invaded by al-Nusra in 2013, being somewhat infiltrated, and in a way that opened the way to those militants to come in and kidnap nuns there. A lot of people still carry the deep scars of this episode. So the years 2016, 2017, 2018 was the liberation of the Ghouta. The Ghouta was this long-standing face-off with militants a stone throw away from Damascus on the eastern suburb, literally. And they had those tunnels, so they could pop up and use their artilleries and bomb the old city of Damascus at will, essentially. So this was also a big, and we all remember this incredible footage of Assad driving his own vehicle, a Toyota Camry. He's just driving there to go see for himself, not only the progress of the offensive, but what needs to be done to rebuild as quickly as possible, because obviously once the military phase is over, you need to proceed to the political aspect, which is rebuilding and making sure people, who live there are not disconnected from basic services, essentially. Then in summer 2018, we had the liberation of Dara, which is where the whole sequence of the Syrian so-called revolution started in March 15th, 2011, with a kind of a Maidan-like approach to it. Some people, I guess, having most likely valid claims, protesting about certain issues, representativity being one of them, and the government initially lending a ear, and then next thing you know, just when there's about to be some kind of arrangement or some kind of platform to start discussing a way out of this, some people, nobody knows where they're from and where they ever ended up leaving, to pop up on rooftops and start shooting the police.
You're talking about 2011 when the unrest began.
That's right.
The media in the West want to portray that as an outgrowth of the Arab Spring, basically. But
right, it's just kind of like a genie that just spread everywhere with no connection between the country.
What you're describing, which is the sort of random firing from rooftops of protesters and police, This
Yes.
also happened in Homs around the same time.
Yes.
And this is identical to the situation in Ukraine in 2014 in Maidan Square. And we've also seen this in other locations as well. So it
Mhm.
seems like a playbook of sorts. And we could speculate about which foreign intelligence agencies might be involved in fomenting that type of unrest. Very, very strategic, very tactical, and very targeted for certain to get a certain result. And a lot of the eyewitness testimonies that we published over the years and interviews have shown that these weren't peaceful protesters; that they were, in fact, violent from the very beginning. Had sectarian overtones. Christians to Beirut, Alawites to the grave was the chant of a lot of protesters in Banyas, in other places as well. So, I mean, that was in 2011. So clearly there was this effort to create the beginnings of a civil war. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. But after the injection of foreign fighters and then the establishment of all these different array of Islamist militant groups, Jaish al-Islam, Arar al-Sham, Jabhat al-Nusra, basically, formations of al-Qaeda in Syria under another brand, basically. But that brings us, to the present, Arnaud, and it's still confounding people. How on earth were these forces that I mean, they are a huge amount of them, of course, in Idlib, 30, 35,000 or more HTS militants armed to the teeth. But they didn't outnumber the Syrian Arab army, who had as well reinforcements and help from Russia and the Islamic Republic of Iran. But somehow, from the end of November, this rapidly cascading series of events, and Aleppo was taken almost without any resistance. I mean, there was some fighting initially there, but they just swooped in from Idlib, and it seemed like the militants, which the West call the rebels, these militant and terrorist factions, were surprised at not encountering any resistance, and then moved on to Hama, and then to Homs, and then very quickly, within 24 hours, to Damascus. I mean, nobody saw this coming, Arnaud. It was really a shock and a surprise. I mean, have you thought about what precipitated this? I mean, how this, with all of the intervention of the Russians, the Iranians, Hashid from Hezbollah from Lebanon, Hashid from Iraq, and the amount of lives lost to hold the center of the country from 2013, 14, 15, right up to the Astana agreement, and even after the Astana, there was still fighting. So much invested, so many lives lost on all sides, but yet there was they didn't really put up a fight to preserve that alliance, to hold the center of the country. What happened?
Well, I think what happened is that everybody fooled themselves into thinking the war was essentially won by late 2019 with this time wholesome liberation of Aleppo in its entirety. There was, I remember this speech by President Assad, and it looked like the end of operation. And obviously, yes, there was this nagging issue, this remaining pocket of Idlib, but I believe you might have spoken about it last week with a Syrian girl. The Russians and the Iranians and the Syrians, at least initially, were ready to go in and finish off the job, but somehow, at the last minute, it did not happen, and then the issue was frozen somehow, and people started focusing, because remember that at the same time we have COVID starting in March 2020, so the borders were sealed. They would not be reopened until November 2021. So if you look at the industry of tourism, for instance, a lot of people rely on tourism as a way to sustain, their families in Syria. And so a lot of people were out of work, for 18 months. This was also combined with what happened in the port of Beirut, the destruction, the implosion of the Lebanese economy owing to the Ponzi scheme that was uncovered later on. And last but not least, the adoption of the Caesar Act was done in December 2019, but it became effective on June 17th, 2020. And so suddenly,
just to quickly explain what the Caesar Act is, Arnaud, because that's an important detail, isn't it?
So the Caesar Act was it originated initially as the story of a high-ranking officer from the Syrian intelligence forces who, for some reason, decided to defect to the West, but not before leaving with tens of thousands of photos presumed to depict victims of torture, of systematic tortures in Syrian jails. And this connects somehow with the narrative we've been hearing since December 7th with Senaya and those dungeons and all those mass graves, which actually we have no photos of. Where are the mass graves? So it's all connected to this. And this was initially, so this person who we never knew his name, we never knew his face, was paraded in all the Western capital, culminating in special hearings on the Hill in Washington. And this gave, this led to the adoption of a congressional act resolution, which basically led to the adoption of this provision, because the standalone legislation did not have enough vote to be adopted in Congress. So what they ended up doing, at least the regime changer crowd, they inserted it as a clause in the National Defense Authorization Act of 2019 to be effective in 2020. So it became this kind of executive provision. And the NDAA has always been this omnibus law in existence since 2006, which aims at fighting the war on terror. So no one really paid attention to it. But the fact is, since it was an effective piece of legislation, when it became effective 6 months after adoption by Congress, people started seeing that it was more than just an additional pack of sanctions. It was a comprehensive operation to asphyxiate the Syrian economy by dissuading any country around it, even on humanitarian grounds, to interact with the Syrian economy in any way, shape, or form using this, very shady dual-use criteria. So, and to the extent there's remote chance that you can use a regular daily staple or even foodstuff in something that would be akin to somehow sustaining the armed forces of Syria, you are likely to be yourself the target of sanctions as a secondary trend of sanction. Yeah. So the Iraq government, the Lebanese government, the Jordanian, well, they were not necessarily predisposed to do so, but it became extremely difficult. The Gulf state, the UAE, let's remind our viewer, the UAE re-established diplomatic relation in December 2018. So they would have been, front and center to help the Syrian economy. And quicker than you can think about it, they were admonished and threatened by Washington. Don't even think about it. We've got this in place. To this, you have to add the Jeffrey Doctrine, which is basically the control of the southeastern most wealthy and rich part of the country, which was all the oil field, which up to that point allowed the people to warm themselves in winter and the army to function with the gasoline, right? And the people to basically drive around. And there was still a little bit left, which accounted for 2% of the entire oil export volume. Those 2%, Syria owned them. So Syria was a well-managed country, self-sustained, and it managed to eke out a profit by exporting the equivalent of 2% of the entire oil that's being sold and exported worldwide. But starting in 2016, 17, 18, the Americans started building a series of bases alongside the Syrian-Iraqi border to ring the two countries. And some of the most notorious one, the one in what's called, I think it's close to Kamishli and Asaka. Ashadi, I think it's called. This is the base that was responsible to basically fill the barrel with the stolen oil. The Kurds would steal the oil. The Syrian Kurds would, do the job of providing the oil into the base, into the container, and then the U.S. Personnel would evacuate the barrels in convoys, almost, I would say, 2 or 3 times a week, about like 4 miles long convoys on average, making their way through the Iraqi Kurdistan, through the I think it was Al-Jadi, was an illegal checkpoint, border point that they had installed there. And then the Barzani clan would basically get a cut from that because they would provide the logistics for refining the oil, and then most of it would be then shipped into Turkey. And we understand that some of it ended up even, to Israel. So we have also this Crescent, Delta Crescent company that Pompeo in August 2020 somehow couldn't control himself, and he mentioned the existence of this sanction breaking, sanction violating a U.S. entity immatriculated in Delaware. And so they were making, and this actually was shut down afterward because, you cannot say one thing and do the other. So, but not unlike what they're doing in the Golan Heights also. They found oil in the Golan Heights, and there's a consortium there with people like former CIA directors. I forgot his name.
Woosley, James Woosley, Dick Cheney, Rupert Murdoch, Bill Richardson. Larry Summers, maybe, I'm not sure, but quite a few people from Epstein's flight list, by the way. But that's Genie Energy.
Genie Energy.
The one that was selling stolen Syrian oil via ISIS or ISIS oil, because ISIS, I think, was also pilfering from Iraq as well. It was Janelle Energy, similar name, Janelle, and that was quickly mothballed once that became public, and but yet all going through Turkey, Right. And Russia exposed this as well. In fact,
we had the satellite pictures. Yes, Russia, you could see all those trucks. Was kind of a bottleneck. There was no room for all those 18-wheelers to go through. Yes,
and vulnerable to airstrikes at that point as well.
Yes,
which unfortunately disrupted the ISIS oil trade. So Russia can take credit for quite a bit of that. I mean, Russia did a lot to thwart ISIS during that period. The question is, what was the U.S. doing?
Well, the U.S., they were financing their operation, their military presence through basically the selling, and part of the proceeds went to essentially, finance the presence of the U.S. Bases there.
Yep.
So you pay, well, that's what Trump said. We're here for the oil, to keep it from ISIS.
Keep the
oil from ISIS.
It was to keep it from Syria, obviously, and from the Syrian people. So the strangulation of the country, and as you rightly said, James Jeffries, who you mentioned here, and I hate to say we got it right too many times, but here's Peter Ford, I believe, wrote this in 2020. Cynical U.S. policy on Syria revealed block the Russians and the Iranians, destroy the economy, to hell with the people. That was a piece that Peter Ford wrote back during, I think it was during that sort of December 2020, right before 2021. And we all knew this was going on, Arnaud, at the time. but there you have Jeffries, who kind of took over from Brett McGurk with this sort of establishment, the occupation of northeastern Syria with U.S. forces and the Kurds as their sort of local proxy. He's still involved in the conversation under the new Trump administration, funny enough. Not much talk about U.S. illegal occupation. I mean, it did come up in the news recently, didn't it? They're talking about, oh, we didn't realize we had that many troops in Syria. I mean, it's like shock by some senator or some
Well,
congressman or
well,
Pentagon.
those of us who we
Yeah.
knew there was about 2,000 troops. It was no secret.
Mm.
But I mean, for the mainstream, it was 900. Yes.
So that's the strategy which you've outlined there: sanctions, targeted sanctions,
Strangling.
asphyxiate is
Death
the word.
by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, so death by 1,000 cuts, strangling the economy, strangling society, creating maximum pressure, as Mike Pompeo likes to call it, to force the Syrian people to rise up to overthrow their government, or weaken it to such an extent that it'll be vulnerable for invasion by terrorist forces. But that's exactly what eventually happened, didn't it?
Yes, because at the same time, so people did not see the dividends of all the blood spilled. To make a long story short, this is how people started somewhat resenting the situation, and we started hearing people saying they were almost nostalgic at the time when rockets would randomly fall on people, where as long as, like they used to say, we had something to eat, we could go to Beirut, cross the border, go to a shopping mall there, fill the cars, the vehicle, the trunks to the brim, and bring it back to Damascus, either for ourselves or to the extent some people, hecked out a living selling, stuff on the street corner that had the merchandise to do so. And so, with the COVID, the combination of the COVID, the border being closed, the Lebanese economy imploding, the explosion of the port in Beirut, the Jeffrey Doctrine, the Caesar Act, all those things started basically, I would say by 2022, the situation was really getting difficult. To give you an idea, as far as the rate of the Syrian lira as compared to the dollar, well, starting in 2010, $1 would get you 50 Syrian pounds. When I got there in right before the COVID started, so we're in March 2020, 1 Syrian pound official rate from the Syrian Central Bank was 2,500 pounds for $1. Street value was 4,000. By late 2022, when I left Syria, we were at 7,000 pounds for $1. From what I understand, before the fall of Damascus, they had reached to 14,000 pounds for $1. And in the days that followed, obviously, with the collapse of the government, there were instances where I heard 25,000 pounds for $1. So it became essentially this kind of Weimar collapse of the Reichsmark situation, where people, the money had no value. They had to actually mint a new bill to prevent people from carrying barrels of cash just to go buy some loaf of bread. This is where we got in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, the problem is the fundamentals have not changed. We just learned that the US stated that they will keep the oil. They're not going to give it back to Jolani and his thugs. We are hearing now from Brussels that any kind of financial relief and lifting of sanction will be predicated on certain conditions, which we might see. We have to see if this is going to be amenable. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people might have thought that by getting rid of the regime, things would economically somehow turn overnight for the better. But I'm afraid this is not going to be the case. And obviously, this is going to probably promote or contribute to the regime, the new regime in place, to be more ruthless, because obviously they've got nothing, to sell. They they've expired their due date. I mean, they did what they were supposed to do, but now it's back to square one. And on top of it, the Israelis, as you mentioned in your introduction, are now controlling a significant portion of the country, including the highest point peak in the Middle East, which allows them to basically eavesdrop about 2,000 miles, 360 degrees, so they can anticipate any kind of and that opens up the airspace for a straight dash into Iranian airspace without having to go around and refuel in Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
So we haven't seen the end because, as neocons used to say, or the armchair generals, men go to Baghdad, boys go to Baghdad and men go to Tehran. So it is not over by any stretch of the imagination. We can probably anticipate, reactivating of ISIS to destabilize Iraq. For the time being, the new Syrian Authority, I guess, as a successor state, for lack of a better word, inherited all the debt of the Assad government. To give you an idea, the Assad government owes $50 billion to the Iranians because the Iranians they expanded military, assistance, but also oil through tankers. So this actually delves into this business of the Captagon drug trafficking, because the idea was to try to at least, muster some money, anything to be somewhat in good standing with the Iranian, because if you don't provide them at least a fifth, I guess, of what you owe them, or part of that 1/5, they might just stop delivering oil altogether. And this is actually what happened now. Iranian stopped delivering oil, so all the oil that was used as a stopgap now is disappeared. We are about to enter winter. I remember instances of infants dying of cold, being found in the morning in the wee hour, wrapped in the blanket because there was no mazout, no fuel to operate the generator, and so there was to the extent we're talking about infants, newborn infant, living in the mountain villages. Some of them, actually found their demise in that situation. So we can expect this to happen again this year, I'm sure. In the wake of the stoppage, the interruption of oil delivery, Iraq also stopped delivering oil. So this is where we're at right now. The Americans are hanging on the oil field, I guess, probably as a means to control, I guess, the new masters in Damascus.
It seems, Arnaud, that the U.S. doesn't appear to have any intention of relinquishing the territory it has taken away from Syria, and I don't believe Israel has any intention of giving back the Golan Heights or Mount Hermon, now any of the new territory it has taken from Syria, and I believe that Turkey has no intention of returning the pieces of northern Syria that it has taken under illegal military occupation as well. And to add to that, Arnaud, Turkey has very overt political designs to take over Aleppo, Syria's second largest city and its former industrial base, which Turkey helped to dismantle with ISIS after the emergence of, or around 2013, 14, 15. They tore apart their industrial sector in Aleppo and shipped all the machinery to Turkey, where it was stripped for spare parts and whatnot. So they basically wiped out Syria as a manufacturing powerhouse in the Middle East. That was also part of strangling and asphyxiating the country. So Syria is effectively already balkanized. Plus, you have the Christian and Alawite minorities along the coast in Latakia and Tartus as well. They've been sort of isolated and set upon by the sectarian militants from Damascus, the bearded HTS militants, calling themselves now the Syrian government forces. So the country's already balkanized. The country is without resources and fuel. its currency is in full hyperinflationary collapse. The new Jolani Al Qaeda terrorist-led government is having trouble governing. Surprise, surprise, as if should be a surprise to anybody. The business of governing is much more complex than just carrying a rifle and having a black bandana around your forehead and marauding through the streets and doing as you wish by holding people at gunpoint. I mean, that's not the business of governing. So it seems to me, Arnaud, that all those external foreign powers have no intention of relinquishing what they've taken. The country is balkanized. Are these not in sectarian strife and battles between Christians and Sunni Muslim HTS militants and so forth, and Alawites being persecuted? Do we not have the perfect conditions for a bloodbath, for a bloody civil war? And looking at the conditions, is this not by design? This looks like this is the intention, that the external powers would like to see HTS fall, but not before a bloody civil war that would formally balkanize Syria, reducing it to a dysfunctional, bankrupt rump state with tons of foreign forces, much not unlike Lebanon was after a decade of civil war. I mean, am I getting too far ahead of myself here, Arnaud? How do you see this playing out?
Well, we've seen what happened in Iraq after the toppling of the regime there. We saw it started with the blowing up of the dome, this Shia dome in 2006, and that marked the first, the beginning of a sectarian war there. And Iraq, we had the surge. Remember the surge? Then we had then ISIS basically was incubating in the U.S. bases there, and it was unleashed in the early 2000 teens, and by 2014 it was threatening Baghdad. And it really took Grand Ayatollah al-Sistani's effort to cobble together this somewhat assembling of tribes under the umbrella of the Ashid, which is now an official branch of Iraqi government, by the way.
The PMUs, the People's Mobilization Units, the Hashd al-Shabi. Right. Yeah, they've been integrated under the Department of Defense, but a lot of pressure from the U.S. to dismantle. At the moment when ISIS is just being unleashed again, right?
Yes. So this is it's a deja vu all over again, huh? But it's Iraq. Recovered. I would say it took Iraq. Iraq is still barely recovering from 20 years of strife, to be sure. They even have Iraqi Kurdistan that's somewhat dances to its own tune. They haven't outright declared independence, but I remember in 2022 there was a tug of war with central authority in Baghdad on the over the oil field in Kirkuk, and the Kurdish autonomous region were somewhat alluding that this oil belonged to them and them alone, to which the Iraqi Constitutional Court said no, it belongs to all the Iraqi people. So this is where we're at now. Every time there's a regime change operation, the country is basically thrown into chronic chaos, what some in Washington would call constructive destruction. And that's exactly what the Yinon plan, called for. A series of balkanized mini-state drawn alongside confessional lines, which are then easy to lean on depending on the priorities of the day. You can lean on one at the expense of the other, and vice versa, as far as the eye can see. And that's where we're at right now, pretty much. Lebanon is a wreck. There's going to be a presidential election on January 9th. Parliamentary parliament is going to vote on the president. And it looks like the Joint Chief of Staff guy, who's Washington's candidate, obviously, that Jolani endorsed last week, Joseph Aoun, no connection to the former president, might be installed. The only guy who stands a chance against him is the Hezbollah and Amal, and probably the Free Patriotic Movement, former general and President Aoun's party candidate, Suleiman Frangier. So we're going to be most likely, yes, dealing with having a duel between these two. So, but again, Lebanon is par excellence the country that up until very recently encapsulated, crystallized the fault lines alongside foreign influence, defining itself by who influences the country and how this reflects into the party, the political scene. And in Iraq, we've seen somewhat of the same thing, because the Iranians were, backing some factions. The Saudis were backing Muqtada al-Sadr. The Americans fell out of favor with their former allies, the Dawa Party, who had been in exile since its foundation in 1957, which in the wake of the US invasion provided Iraq with 3 straight prime ministers, including Maliki, I forgot their name, all of them, but one of them was Maliki, who was, I remember well because he was in charge during the Saddam trial. And he fell out of favor when he backed up the Hashid Shaabi in 2014. So America basically said, you're not on our list anymore. You have to go. At the same time, Maliki is a big Iraqi nationalist, so the idea that he would be of the Shia faith by no means lines him up along with Iran. That would be a misconception to think like that. Iraqis are Arabs first and foremost; they're not Farsis. And so, yes, we have this kind of unstable situation, and we saw it during the parliamentary election in Iraq in 2021. There was no clear-cut outright majority. So we have those kind of blocks checking each other. And as for Syria, we might see ingredients of those 2 case scenarios meshed one into the other, but on a much smaller scale, kind of a ROM state, as you mentioned. I think that's an appropriate term, a ROM state. Which will be constantly connected under perfusion from the IMF most likely and the World Bank.
The money doesn't go very far, does it? I mean, when it's coming out of the IMF tap,
no,
it doesn't go. What you get per dollar, it's
drip. Yes,
it's nothing.
Yes.
It gets evaporated up in interest payments plus
Bakshish.
Bakshish. I mean, seriously, with this regime right now, plus austerity measures that are imposed, economic measures that stifle economic growth and might even, in terms of the instability of the Syrian currency, who knows? They're in a kind of, hyper stagflationary.
Well, we might see actually. My take on it is we might see a Turkish absorption of a big chunk of Syria, introducing the Turkish lira. Yes,
Turkish lira. Okay, so those would be like the northern and parts of the country.
Well, no, even further south. I mean, if you recall Erdogan's speech, 10 days ago, he was really explicit about Athe, Aleppo, and Damascus. Damascus, to him, is the prize. He's going to be going to Damascus in a couple of weeks, fulfilling his promise of praying in the Umayyad Mosque, as he said in 2012.
That's right.
So I wouldn't be surprised that all this area of Syria, but for the coastal area and the Kurdish held area and the Israeli, all this kind of triangle, inverted triangle uh, at the heart of Syria will be absorbed by Turkey. Because Turkey cannot afford to have a basket case of a state south of its border.
Yeah, not
So it
only
has
that, but the demand for Turkish currency as an additional market will also help its domestic economy as
yes,
well. So in a way, this is kind of a micro colonial game that's often been played by countries throughout history. Turkey is no different in this case, taking advantage
no,
of somebody else's pain and suffering. And the not so ironic reality here, Arnaud, is that Turkey is directly responsible for the destabilization and collapse of Syria as a state. They played a direct role in making that happen, and now they're going to do what maybe they've learned from the United States. Turkey wants a little bit of this action. I mean, it's worked so well for the U.S. over the years by destabilizing countries and turning them into dollar zones, basically.
sure.
Why not
It's
try
also it's also a way of washing the humiliation of the Sykes-Picot
it?
Accord of 1920, 1922,
Yeah.
and the fall of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Ankara considers those lands as historically hers,
Mhm.
and in a way, uh, on the domestic front for Erdogan, it's a way to cater to the nationalists and the grey wolves and all this coalition that he basically solicited to win re-election in May 2023. So everybody is happy in a way, whether you are a nostalgic of the Ottoman tradition or pan-Turkism or pan-Turanism. This fits the bill for every agenda in play in domestic policy in Turkey, and we can expect this sequence to probably give them more appetite and start focusing now on Central Asia. Now, that's for a different show.
But so back to the original. So it looks like ISIS is being unleashed. That gives a new Trump administration, an excuse to up its commitment in Syria militarily, flex a bit of muscle. The fight against ISIS, everyone loves that in America. That's a win-win in terms of U.S. military intervention. The Iraqis wanted the U.S. out. That was the only unanimous thing to come out of the Iraqi parliament over the last few years is reinforcement of this idea. We don't want the Americans there. This will basically shore up an extension of the American presence in Iraq. All of these things benefit Israel and that direct flight path to the Iranian front line, as you said, from Tel Aviv using air-to-air refueling tankers. Israel can do that itself now, having all that secure airspace. So one of the great benefits of the revolution, as they call it in Syria, the revolution has benefited Israel and the United States. So the revolution was really a product of U.S.-Israeli planning. Turkey is also a beneficiary. They played a role. It's almost as if, and this is exactly how it was described to me by a top Syrian official earlier this year, actually, that this was the breakup, the division, the destruction of Syria was a division of labor. He described it, a Syrian
That's
diplomat.
it.
So it was a division of labor. Qatar supplied the cash. Turkey provided the staging ground. Jordan provided the southern staging ground. Israel supplied the air force for al-Qaeda and for the militants. The soft power came from Britain. They supplied the media, soft power, white helmets, propaganda. The United States provided the occupation of and throttling and taking the resources away in northeastern Syria through occupation. And the Gulf states also, in their way, provided support for this project as well. So that brings us back to what happened on December 8th, Arnaud. Some people believe that, well, I think it's pretty clear Turkey lied about the Astana ceasefire, and that helped to buy time for the militants to build up their forces and the NATO to build them up in Idlib. much like the lying about the Minsk Accords, which Ukraine and the French and the Germans did, provided time to build up the Nazi battalions in Ukraine and the militant nationalists to NATO standard, preparing for the coming war, which happened. And so we have that as a kind of an established fact at this point. But what about the position right now, the precarious position of Russia, of Iran? There's a lot of fingers being pointed. Assad loyalists, you could say, or saying Russia threw Syria under the bus. The Iranians betrayed the Syrians. Why didn't they fight for Syria? Why didn't they, take the lead in fighting? But it seems like during this whole time, Arnaud, there was a collapse. It seemed like this is a signal to collapse in Syrian institutions under the Assad government at the very last moment. So I take on board the economic asphyxiation, the stress that caused on all the ranks of the military, opening up to bribery and corruption from external foreign powers with cash. Everybody wants to survive. But then there's also the Arab Gulf states, Arnaud. They were making rapprochement to Damascus. Did they make promises to Bashar al-Assad that we're going to do this, we're going to reboot the economy in Syria, and just wait, give it a little bit of time, in taking his focus away, his government's focus away from fortifying the defenses, modernizing the military, and so forth, almost as if the Gulf states, Arnaud, tell me if I've got this wrong or not, but it seemed like the Gulf states were playing possibly a game of deception, the Emirates, to pull Syria away from Russia, to pull them away from Iran, and maybe fomenting a type of anti-Russian sentiment within Syria, within the ranks of institutions, and anti-Iranian as well. And this was really part, again, the division of labor continues right up to the fall of Damascus. Do you have any thoughts on this possible scenario?
Well, to be sure, I mean, to the point of rebuilding and reforming and retooling the Syrian Arab army, there was a proposal in 2018 by the Russian Federation to do just that. It would have been a 25-year program, training the officers, from top to bottom. But this required, for the Syrian government to pretty much give the keys of the kingdom to Russian companies, and they refused. Essentially, they privileged the traditional clans and tribes arrangements at the regional level. So there was no reforming, there was no retooling of the Syrian Arab army. As far as your theory on the Gulf state is concerned, well, I mean, who would have had the means to rebuild Syria? I mean, some figures have circulated that it would take up anywhere between $250 to $400 billion to rebuild Syria, which, as of the recording of this show, is a field of ruin completely. It's so flattened. So I think, except KSA and the Emirates, I don't see who else would have this financial power to do it. And so it is very likely, and let's keep in mind that no state is monolithic. There were some different factions within the Syrian state apparatus. And some people most likely were convinced that after having explored the possibilities of maybe, rebuilding using the Russians' help, finding out that, it came with too much of conditions that were too hard to swallow, that they didn't want to be absorbed by the Iranians either, because not unlike what I referred earlier in Iraq, they are Arabs. And so, that's an important ethos that one has to take into account. Basically, they went back to the traditional perception of who should be the people knock on whose door to knock to get some help, keeping in mind that those people have their entries in Washington. And if we provide enough reassurances that we're not going to open a second front in the Golan, for instance, and we're going to really somehow, we might play some rhetorical game on the axis of resistance, but in the end, we're not like fanatics, we're not hysterical about certain perception of resistance per se. Who knows? I mean, we're talking about 13 years of grinding slowly but surely the metal of people who once upon a time those questions would not have been even molded.
Yep.
But they have families, and they know that at some point the gig is going to be up. And so we can imagine how easy it is for one to, if anything, convince oneself. Hearing, being dined and travel to Riyadh. Remember all this triumphant moment and this walk of Assad, long walking alone. It's triumphant until he meets MBS and they pose for the photograph, and then they go into he reintroduces him into the Arab League, even though the Syrian government will tell you they never left, which is true, they never left, they were kicked out, but this was a triumphal moment. This is we're talking about, we're in May 2023.
Yep.
And it looks like things might be on the up and up. Add to this, there was this talk about a possible rapprochement with Ankara, or somewhat of a reconciliation. I think I wrote an article for your site back in August 2022 called "The Sultan is up to his old tricks," and obviously he was. But this rapprochement, this extended hand, was dipped into cynicism, bearing on getting rid of those 3 to 4 million Syrian refugees, which had led to him losing major intermediary elections, inter alia, the Istanbul city, to the opposition. So the writing was on the wall for Erdogan, and the vibrant economy of the 2002-2010 era was gone, victim of the global slowdown of the economy per se, not spared by it anyway. And so he had to somehow adjust his stance. And some people, basically were tempted to say that Assad should have shown himself to be more flexible. One can imagine that the appointment of Bashar Jafari in Moscow was laying the ground for extraordinary talks under the auspices of Moscow between Ankara and Damascus. For some reason, that never happened. I think the calculus for Assad was that if I bend my knee now, when the Turkish army is still de facto occupying Syria, I'm going to lose a lot domestically. I might be contested from within. This could be used against me, and in Syria, it's something you have to keep in mind. Also, you can't just be projecting weakness, lest you are playing with fire. So we'll never know, I guess, and there's no need to cry over spilled milk in that sense, despite what some former official might be saying. It's nobody knows what it's like to be in the shoes of someone. I mean, the guy was holed up in his palace with militants about 400 meters away. We're in 2014, 2015, and he stayed there. He's someone who was not even fated to become a head of state. He became head of state by accident. His spouse is fighting a second bout with leukemia, another bout with cancer. This time is a very aggressive cancer. and the chances of survival are not that high.
Yep.
He might just have decided that, khalas, as we say there, enough is enough.
Or is it could it be also a case of that? And I know this is a bit of a long shot, but let's just be also realistic here, that to avoid another bloodbath. I mean, if you think about the occupation of
Certainly.
Ghouta, Kaboom, Douma, Yarmouk, all of these were taken over by militant Islamists and bogged down for years. Creating, there's warfare within Damascus for years, plus Aleppo, plus the others, plus Homs. They just didn't want to go through that again, and maybe thought if they withdraw, save the institution, save the buildings, save the cities, save the population, not lose 100,000 soldiers in the process.
Well, I don't think they had 100,000 soldiers left.
Because on paper mobilization was 300,000 plus, but in reality, in terms of combat ready soldiers,
that's what it is. In terms of combat readiness, no. I mean, the only two formations that were ready, war experienced, was the 25th Division, led by Suhail al-Hassan, commander of the Tiger Force. He was so illustrated. He illustrated himself in such a compelling fashion that the Russians actually assigned him 2 Russian bodyguards. It's the only Syrian officer to whom that happened, eliciting, by the way, a lot of envy in the rest of the staff in Syria. And the other one was the 4th Division, led the Republican Guard, led by Bashar al-Assad.
Yep.
So everybody else was just conscript people, who a lot of the generals also were sent back to their villages after years and years of military service. Politically, it was not feasible to keep those people ad vitam aeternam under the in uniform. It's not possible.
Yeah.
Which is why actually, so some would say, well, they might have thought about building trenches with dragon teeth and making it 100 feet deep and 200 wide. That would have slowed the militants maybe long enough to get those units in position and contain them slightly out of the Idlib regime. But that was never done. And don't forget also that the Emirate of Idlib received help from the Budanov, the head of intelligence of Ukraine. And they, learning on the experience of the special military operation and the introduction of drones as part and parcel of modern warfare, they trained them. They initiated the militants to this. They taught them how to build as many of them as possible. They taught them how to operate them. And I believe that some Ukrainian operatives were in Idlib at the time when the offensive was started to give them coordinates on the concentration of Syrian troops.
Yeah.
And so it was in a landscape like Syria with almost no forest, no cover. It was like a video game. I mean, they could not begin to assemble. They could not begin to put together defensive lines. They would be literally cut down to pieces by those kamikaze drones, which came at them like a...
And the electronic warfare defense was not in place. The type of thing that the Russians and the Ukrainians now have an effective stalemate in terms of technology, counter drones plus drones. And it is on the front lines a bit of a stalemate. But those aren't the conditions in Syria. So huge tactical advantage on the part of the militants. So that can't be underestimated. I mean, not that could have been overcome after a period of months with some significant reinforcements, maybe Wagner Wagner type reinforcements
No,
drafted.
Wagner is gone.
Yeah, and there is plans afoot to reinvigorate that side of things from Russia in Syria, but it just wasn't there in time. Likewise, you can't just snap your fingers and get 20,000 Hashtag to come marching over the border. I mean, that takes weeks to prepare, plus threats from Israel and from the United States that they will airstrike those convoys and regard them as terrorists. So and get away with that, of course, internationally, no problem. So the whole thing was like a perfect storm, and one has to look at it, I think, in a broad timeline. Arnaud, I think you've done well to stretch out that timeline of analysis to show the conditions which led up to that moment, and also the conditions on the day from a military tactical point of view, and disadvantage Syria had in terms of relying on conscripts, no money, no motivation, a country beleaguered by over a decade of war,
Exhausted.
Exhausted on many levels. So maybe to live and fight another day, because the instability of the current U.S. and Israeli and Turkish-backed terrorist government in Damascus may not hold for long, or it could descend into a bloody civil war. So, I mean, it's hard to second guess what happened. I think we need to be realistic about the machinations of the internal Syrian deep state under a Ba'athist system, under all those stresses that we've just mentioned there, is going to create lots of problems, rivalries, and maybe distrust, paranoia against Russians and Iranians as well, plus external pressure, external money and incentives from the Gulf as well. I mean, so all of this at play, it was almost, eventually they would break Syria, and they have done. And the question, Arnaud, is it going to break further? And if so, how long can the Russians hold out in an environment like that? Do you think the days are numbered for Russia's military presence there, or will they somehow transform the situation and have security guarantees with Damascus, provide support perhaps? I don't know. What do you see happening with regards to Russia, and how does this affect Russia's position vis-a-vis Ukraine right now? Go ahead.
Well, to be sure, the situation of the Syrian bases and ports are somewhat suspended, because we need to wait until there's a new government. So they need to organize elections first, and there has to be a legitimate process which leads, not unlike what we've seen in Iraq in March 2005, ex nihilo, out of the voting booth, there will be a parliamentary legitimacy coming out, and whoever is appointed to negotiate, to revisit this file bearing on the Russian assets, will be under tremendous pressure. I'm certain of it. But it would appear as if objectively, and this is something that the Turks, to the extent, my hypothesis that the Turks have long-term plans for this this huge chunk of Syria. They will need the Russians to provide humanitarian assistance, because the Americans sure aren't going to do it. They're just here to, help themselves with the oil. So the Russians have a role. They have a card to play as far as humanitarian assistance is concerned. They just have to somehow, not unlike most of us, have to walk on eggshell until Trump comes into office, one would say, because the Biden administration, if we go by some of the reports that were published today from Russian intelligence, there are attempts to try to create a provocation against the Russian bases, using most likely the most virulent, the most fanatic elements among the militia, the coalition of militias there. So we'll see what happens. It's kind of out in the open, but I'm thinking that somehow Russia might still be able to pull its interest and preserve its interest in Syria. It's in again the interest of the Turks, the interest of Jolani. Now the question is, who is Jolani? That's an interesting thing. There was a psychological profile made of it, and the guy seems to have been going back to his days as the emir of Idlib. He was somewhat of a backstabber. I mean, he maneuvered. He knows how to deal with extremely complicated situation under pressure. So he's not going to crack. That much is certain. But it's one thing to do it at the scale of Idlib. It's another thing altogether to duplicate what is done there at the level of the entire country, or quasi the entire country. The Turks might think that they control him, but to the extent the Israeli American, want to somehow pull the rug from Turkey, and not have Turkey have all of its cake and eat it too, they might either threaten or entice Jolani that they will cover for him, if he somehow does things his own way. And so that's exactly the environment that Jolani has been used to deal with, and with certain success, I must say. We obviously have seen that he's someone who is able to retool and rebrand himself. He's a chameleon. Like all sociopaths, he's a very cynical man, and there was an interesting scene actually yesterday. He was receiving the head of Iraqi intelligence, and you could see the cross of his revolver popping out of his, underneath his jacket, because you know that in Iraq he's wanted for murdering Iraqis back in the days when he was in Al Qaeda operatives.
Yeah, he's a killer. He's a
killer.
He's a murderer, a killer, a wanted terrorist, who's being feted by the Americans, the British, and other.
I know.
And the EU.
But,
I think what's her name? Callis.
Yes.
Kaya Kallas, the Estonian, former Estonian prime minister, who's now somehow head of the European Union's foreign policy division, with no experience at all, of course, and she's desperate to court the new Al Qaeda led regime in Damascus. I mean, they're all falling over each other to get photo ops with. He's almost got the Zelensky sort of celebrity power for the moment. I mean, it's not going to last that long, but it to me, I'm not surprised by this, because it's just the behavior of the new Western, technocrat. They have to get that photo op and show solidarity with the latest champion of democracy, which at the moment is Syria. It's a joke, but this is.
Well, keep in mind that I don't think the Brits, American, and Israeli, as we mentioned earlier, see any interest in a stabilization of Syria,
right,
which would be the interest of Turkey.
Because if they did, wouldn't you see pallets of shrink-wrapped dollars arriving by C-130 in Damascus, as we saw when it was time to try to stabilize Iraq? They flooded it with dollars. We're not seeing that here, Arnaud, are we? Quite the opposite, in fact. We're seeing the stoking of sectarian tension. We're seeing the unleashing of ISIS. We're seeing the throwing the Kurds under the bus again, which the U.S. do periodically.
It's interesting that the Shia in Syria have this eschatology about what they call the Sufyani. Sufyani is this kind of boogeyman at the end time, and he comes with his black banners. So we can almost conceive that this goes way back in the strategist chambers in DC and London, where they actually put this plate, a super production, and they've got the actors, they have the outfits, they have the stage is set, and there's two Sufyanis. So to the extent they're laying now the ground for sectarian strife, they may very well be laying the stage for the removing of Jolani at some point by something infinitely worse.
Yeah, I think so.
And this will prevent any kind of Turkish stabilization of Syria or what's left of it.
Yeah, something worse.
Something worse, if it's possible.
Yeah, I think it is possible. We have seen that before. Certainly that could happen here. And again, that's, we won't know until Trump comes into power what type of stability or frozen aspect this might take over in terms another round of strategy or diplomacy.
But those people play the long game all the time. So 4 years of Trump, for them, they can wait. We can have Jolani for 4 years. It's nothing.
Yeah.
It's a drop of water.
Yeah,
and
we can
then
have a civil war for 4 years.
yeah,
and,
just low level.
Yeah, low level, low intensity civil war in different pockets. Let that bleed out.
This is what happened in Iraq. Remember, they had actually this kind of low level between, remnants of the regime, as they used to say, and Al Qaeda types.
Yep.
And then they unrolled ISIS in 2011.
Yeah, and then ISIS formally came out of the closet in June 2014, and that's when the explosion kind of happened. But so we could see another that type of a theatrical release, if you will, of either a re-release of ISIS or even something else, or a different type of threat, for the West and for the region.
In our old camp near Asake, it's a refugee camp, it's almost like a transgenerational incubator of ISIS. You got those who were captured in anywhere between 2013, 14, 15 and on. And now that you got their kids who are already, in 10, 12, and are completely indoctrinated with this. And you got about 50 or 75,000 of them there.
So you just need to wait 5 years until they get to be 18, 19.
That's right. And then you'll have about 100,000 plus hardcore, having lived in wretched conditions. You have all the ingredients of some pretty sociopathic people here that just being unleashed onto the region.
Yeah, and I saw that when I was at a green bus exchange in Al Loire of Homs, when the last militants were shipped to Idlib armed, and I saw 3 generations of jihad, you could say, but that's not really a good word to use. 3 generations of militant Islamist militant fighters, or what they call rebels. But we know the word rebel, it's much more elastic when it comes to Syria, because the West have always had an interest in backing Muslim Brotherhood factions, right back through the reign of Hafiz al-Assad. The infamous Hama massacre in 1982, it's portrayed in Western lore and in kind of Arab Spring lore as this unprovoked, just mad act of aggression by the Syrian government. But the reality was something else. This was an international, foreign-backed insurgent movement designed to destabilize Syria from within. There's no doubt about that. We even have admissions in cables that have been leaked or declassified from the U.S. side to show that this was definitely within the U.S. interest at the time. So I mean, but that forms the narrative for resistance, intergenerational resistance in Syria, and likewise we'll have other narratives that will come out of what could be another Lebanon-style civil war, which was anything but civil and certainly not contained to Lebanese internal politics or interest. That could happen again in Syria. I mean, this really does blow up the region, Arnaud, in a way that even Iraq didn't, because of the pivot point that Syria represents. But it was stable for so long. It was a secular state. It was a federation of sorts, but still secular. Now you have a breeding ground for extremist, fanatical, religious-based terrorism. this is the nightmare, the sum of all fears, and it wouldn't be difficult for this to spread to so any quote terrorist events that we see manifesting in Europe, in Russia's got to be concerned about this as well, going forward.
Sure.
And in the Middle East as well, because let's not forget, it was the worst sectarian violence occurred in Syria and Iraq during this ISIS period, the ISIS heyday, and even before that in Iraq. So I mean, the conditions are now ripe for a lot.
Blowback is going to be terrible, not just in the Central Asian region, but also in Europe, obviously. So it's going to be this kind of mad dog that's going to be unleashed, to advance the same people's geostrategic interest. So yeah, it's a tragedy, and I don't think the region is going to be recovering for probably a generation. Unfortunately, this is something that's going to probably hollow out. For those who can leave the region, they will leave the region, because who wants to raise a family in such an environment? So it's going to be a brain drain. It's going to be some kind of a regression. It will take most likely decades. And you have those different theaters who are, conflating with each other. So they create a new dialectical process. It's not just kind of like an addition of separate parts. It creates an entity that is the sum of all those parts, whether it's Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and it's a disaster. But again, if you look at the logic behind the Oded plan, the Oded-Ninon plan, it's perfectly logical. It's exactly what was envisioned, and it lays the ground now to confront Iran head on. And this will be actually,
go ahead.
This will be actually interesting to see what happens as far as the Trump incoming administration is concerned, because I know that Trump, boasts a lot. He has this part of his own style, rhetorical style. But J.D. Vance seems to be a lot more serious about, hitting Iran and hitting it hard, as he said when interviewed on the issue.
Yep.
So
that remains to be seen. The aggression, certainly when we want to read U.S. foreign policy in the region, we have to read Netanyahu. And what Israel wants, Israel will get from the United States. And so if we look at what Israel's strategic desires are, objectives are, then the U.S. will help provide those. That's how we translate U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. So
Israel will want to have the U.S. present and even in more larger numbers as much as possible. So creating the condition of objective chaos in a region is the perfect way to get the U.S. to increase its footprint. And then you can, if you're Tel Aviv, you can then, basically direct the next stage of operation, keeping in mind that, they're already here, the fleet is already there. CENTCOM has already got an office in Tel Aviv. NATO has an office in Amman, Jordan. So the time is right. The time is right for taking on Iran, which is, again, and don't forget, Iran is one side of the Primakov triangle, which is the fundamental architecture of the emerging BRICS order. If you remove Iran, which is the energetic supply node to China, then China cannot function anymore. All the well-led plans of developing infrastructure for this revamped version of One Belt, One Road is pretty much over and done with. So Iran, not only as far as the regional establishing regional hegemony and supremacy for Israel, but also in thus far as preventing BRICS from even getting off the ground, has got to be disposed of. It fits perfectly in that sense.
So yeah, let's look ahead to the Belt and Road, to the development of BRICS, and look at these events in Syria and how disruptive that they will be for those type of initiatives, plus all the different corridors being proposed by competing factions and coalitions.
North-South with Russia.
Yep.
25-year deal signed between Tehran and Beijing in 2021 to supply China with all the energy it needs in exchange for finished goods, which somehow alleviate the embargo on Iran.
Yep.
So
Turkish-Iraqi joint project for inland corridor from the Gulf to Turkey to Europe to bypass Bab el-Mandeb. There's tons of these different pipelines as well, infrastructure, railroad projects, all of these things. So all of this stuff is up for grabs, but all of these things require something, Arnaud. They require stability.
Yes.
Stability to construct and to direct foreign investment will only come if there's going to be an ROI, a return on investment. Who is going to put money into an unstable situation? And so all of these things remain on hold, but the interests are there. There's different constellations of interest from the Middle East, from the US to Russian, Iranian, different combinations. Turkey wants to be a regional hub of energy transit and collect all the fees from transit. So everybody has their vision of the new Middle East. But it seems like, Arnaud, that the constant conflict of these competing interests will mire the region in instability and dysfunctionality for perhaps longer, as if they haven't suffered enough. Maybe it's not done yet by the looks of it. So that's something that we could get into certainly for another discussion. I would like to have that discussion with you at a later date, especially about what all these competing projects are and what the ramifications are. But we got a couple of minutes left, and I really want to get your opinion on Russia and Ukraine. Trump's coming in. There's an opportunity to freeze the conflict, negotiate some kind of a settlement. Is this possible? If so, how long will it take?
Okay, so let's look at what we know. There was a press conference by Sergei Lavrov a couple of days ago, which pretty much summed up where we are in as far as the Russian perception of events. They are trying to share everybody's enthusiasm about the change in the White House and this idea that, as has been repeated by Trump himself, the violence must end. The problem is the perception of the conflict as it exists from the American side. We can expect that the Special Envoy Kellogg is probably going to be first visiting Moscow and field the situation from the Russians' perspective and compile a report. And will that report inform Trump as to what he needs to know before he comes up with some kind of suggestions? I don't know. I mean, I've read some background on this Kellogg guy. He doesn't seem to be the sharpest tool in the shed. He sounds like one of those
marginally sharper than General Jack Keane, but not much.
Okay, well, this is starting from really down low here. This is obviously we're not going to, from Moscow's perspective, settle for Minsk 3. We are perfectly cognizant of what happened in Syria with the Idlib freeze.
Yep.
And so if somehow they are lured into allowing some kind of situation where, okay, the 4 regions are yours. They will be recognized and integrated in all international treaties to reflect your new borders. But we're going to somehow do a retool, a rebranding of our guy, so Zelensky has to go. He's worn out, he's welcome. But what guarantee do we have that you're not going to put a new iteration of the same ideology in Kiev, who, when the moment comes, will do at least as much, if not worse, than what Zelensky has done? Then we have this issue of interposition forces, European peacekeeping forces. Macron was in Poland a few days back trying to sell this to the Poles, who somehow turned it down. The Poles are smelling that they don't want to have, they don't want to hear anything about this. But the idea is to put 100,000 European troops from about 5 countries, I guess, on the opposite side of a DMZ. Yep. So that means that the conditions next time around will be not the Ukrainians to the last Ukrainians, but to the last Europeans. And since most of them are all members of NATO, they won't even need to have the discussion of what will be left of Ukraine, the rump Ukraine, to become a NATO member, since the most likely a trigger of the next conflict will be a false flag on those peacekeepers who are all members of NATO. So this cannot work out like this. I don't know what's going to happen, but again, you have to be able to win the peace, and to win the peace, you have to refuse to be lured into the easy way out. Politically, on the domestic front, my take is that people understand the stakes, and they are confident that, and if it needs to be seen through its logical end, then militarily, they should go all the way and do and accomplish the aims that they've given for themselves. Because the moment they succumb to the sirens of the West, yeah, we're pals again, we'll lift the sanctions, you can reintegrate your Olympic Games and the Grand Slam tennis finals, and it's over. I mean, that's how they do it.
Eurovision Song Contest, you're welcome back into
all this nonsense.
Israel out, Russia in. So
that's right. Yeah.
So and by that token, Arnaud, Russia's made it pretty clear that they don't trust almost any agreement inked by any U.S. administration, and see it potentially as being undone in 4 years when the next incoming administration arrives. So it's like the U.S. has kind of lost credibility as an international guarantor or negotiator for anything serious because of their unreliability and basically destroying the JCPOA, the anti-ballistic missile treaty, the INF treaty, all of these agreements they've just basically either walked away from or thrown a hand grenade into. So there's no incentive for Russia there. But I think the key is what you said, Arnaud. It's the domestic political front of Ukraine. So we have this character here, who's almost become a bit of a vaudeville act internationally. He's got a green jumper on saying, "I'm Ukrainian" here. So he's taken the role on. Can you believe this guy? Can you believe he's really taken this acting role on, and he's internalized it, and he's become the character. He has become the character. But the problem is, Arnaud, he's a dictator right now. He suspended elections until further notice, until he beats the Russians, which may never happen. So you either got a president for life, or he's going to bleed the country dry before fleeing by private jet to Switzerland or something. Or London. So that leaves us the question, do you think there's going to be political, some kind of elections in Ukraine in the near future? And if so, well, there is somebody who's emerged. I want to throw this to you. I'll throw you a piece of a clip here, Arnaud. This is Alexei Arestovich, who is many people aren't aware, he's been decamped in the United States. Zelensky's put criminal charges against him for 3 cases, so he can't go back to Ukraine. He's viewed by some as the potential #1 rival politically to Zelensky. And he just did a podcast with Patrick Bet-David, which was quite revealing. Here's just a real clip from this, and let's talk about this type of character in the setup in Ukraine. Listen to this.
You go out there and you talk like this. You think they're going to let somebody like you win?
I think I will win.
Really?
Yes.
Really? Who do you trust more, Zelensky or Putin?
Putin.
You trust Putin more. Why is that?
Because the enemy is a better teacher.
So fair play to Pat David. I've been a big critic of some of his geopolitical dalliances, but he's doing his homework and he's working on it. So he's done a great job there to get Arestovich. So Arestovich is basically positioning himself as a potential negotiation partner with Russia, saying he wants a neutral Ukraine. And he is going to win over the Ukrainian population, or what's left of it, with this position. He wants to be neutral and have good relations with the West and Russia. I mean, didn't Yanukovych try this before, Arnaud? But maybe he's got a better chance of making this work now after everyone's seen the horrors of war. And Arestovich himself has been on the front line, so he's no stranger to the conflict. He himself he graduated with Zelensky, same year, I think. From the
he was an advisor to Zelensky.
Yes, former advisor.
He was in the first circle.
Yep.
They had a falling out in 2022, shortly after the start of the STO. So, and then he started making those podcasts where he would basically take the exact opposite stance from what Zelensky was doing, becoming increasingly a thorn in his side. But to me, it doesn't really matter, because we know ultimately that discussions bearing on the resolution of the conflict are to be taking place between Moscow and Washington. So whoever puppet they installed in Kiev will be for cosmetic purposes. I think at this point, Zelensky, first of all, the guy is illegitimate because he did not present himself to the voters last May when his term as president expired. So technically, he should be handing over power to the president of the parliament there. And so, he's just completely illegitimate. And I think he's completely, let's put it this way, it's an understatement. War out is welcome. I mean, he will go down in history as the infamous narco Führer who basically sacrificed his own people to get himself a real estate portfolio. That's pretty much, that sums up the character in a nutshell. So, but what's left to say? I mean, to the extent Arestovich is cut from the same cloth, he will say whatever his masters want him to say. And don't forget about Zaluzhny, the former supreme commander of the armed forces, who's right now is serving as Ukrainian UK ambassador, but who's likely to try to make a comeback. And,
so the British have given him. He's basically a brawler. They've given him a facelift. They've thrown a suit on him, a Savile Row suit. He looks great. They've cleaned him up. He's starting to slightly more erudite. So let's be honest, Arnaud. Whoever comes after Zelensky has to have the support of the military in Ukraine. So Zaluzhny ticks that box. Arestovich also ticks that box. So you have 2 legitimate, viable competitors to assume power. Now, if it was by coup, it would have to be Zaluzhny would probably be a more successful, a Western-backed military coup, which would be a good transition for the American and the British, let's be honest. But it would provide them with a softer launching pad to some kind of negotiations with Russia. Zelensky, it's not going to happen, obviously. So, but also we know it's not going to happen, Arnaud, because Putin said that he's not going to have any serious negotiations with Zelensky until elections. If he's reelected, then he'll negotiate.
Held, yes.
So we know Zelensky's not going to get reelected. I mean, the chances of that are slim and none. So there's not going to be a negotiator. So Trump's coming in saying he's going to end this, he's going to sort it all out in 24 hours. That's not going to happen, Arnaud.
It's a non-starter. Yeah.
Go ahead. What are your thoughts? Final thoughts, and we'll wrap this up. But I think it looks to me like Trump's not going to be able to perform that 24-hour miracle. Go ahead, Arnaud.
Well, as you say, I mean, it's not just the 23 days until Trump takes office. It's going to be also the time required to get a legitimate Ukrainian head of state to sign the papers. So this could take 3 to 4 months. So we could be looking at April or May, maybe elections in May or June. And so starting negotiation, de facto negotiation next summer. That gives Russia plenty of time to fulfill its military objectives and completely change the configuration of what it is we're talking about by the time a ceasefire is called for and negotiation begin in earnest. And Russia is perfectly aware of that. That's why they are not falling into the trap of saying, yeah, sure, violence should cease. Enough blood has been shed. No. What we keep hearing from the top leadership in Moscow is the military operation will proceed apace and its objective will be met. That's very clear.
Yeah. So that Russia will no doubt use this interim period to perhaps improve its security position vis-a-vis Odessa, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, for example. So I mean that's bound to happen. I really don't think that they have thought this out yet at the Trump camp. I think they're a little bit behind on this, and they're getting pushed further behind by the Biden administration, who have been clearly encouraging Zelensky to attack targets in Russia, even hitting Kazan. I mean, well deep into Russian territory. I mean, that's just going to further, I think, push the Russians to see this as a security imperative, and any negotiations with the U.S. or with Kiev are going to either include security guarantees, or the Russians are going to take those security guarantees themselves unilaterally, and I think that's where I think they'll be able to actually catch Trump on the back foot on this as he comes in. I really do. I don't think it's going to be very successful initially. I think the Trump administration's probably, Arnaud, in my opinion, going to have to do a lot of fancy maneuvering to get to a position of credibility to somehow be able to be perceived as leading some kind of negotiations in the spring or something. But again, that can't be until after elections in Ukraine. So
I would say summertime.
Yeah. So I mean, that's an eternity in politics.
Yes, but look at it this way. That justifies the deep state, U.S. deep states, to keep, to stay the course as far as providing funding and arms to Ukraine. Because until a ceasefire is called for, they can't just unilaterally stop supporting Ukraine. So they've got at least 6 months of gravy trying to go, at least.
At least.
So it's all good, yes.
Yeah, and provocations and military skirmishes and who knows.
But they'll get the Europeans to pay. Under Trump, that will be the Trump Dutch. Trump will get, he's gonna ride the European hard.
Yeah.
And that's going to exacerbate division within NATO. So in the grander scheme of things, this might lead to interesting development.
I'd say so. I'd say those divisions in NATO are already appearing. Central Europe is breaking off. Hungary, Slovakia, Poland is wavering in a public polling level. I mean, the Polish people are not supporting the war in Ukraine at all. Germany is just had a vote of no confidence in the Schultz government. They're not exactly in a strong position on all this. So yeah,
with an election coming up in February, so that would be interesting to see what comes out of this.
correct.
I mean, we have the head of the AfD saying she wants to leave Europe. So it's not just NATO. We want to leave Europe.
And they're not going to support the AfD on the Ukraine. Is very clear, their position. It's very clear. So, and France isn't exactly a bastion of stability, are they? Politically, with its
but the difference,
government.
Yes, exactly. But just this might be the prelude to the invocation by Macron of Article 16 of the Constitution, because he wants to remain in charge. He wants to. He considers that he doesn't really care what the French public thinks of him. And he has to basically bring France into under the complete European orbit. So that means to precipitate financial collapse.
Right.
And so if somehow he feels that there is resistance to this plan of liquidating France, because that's what he is, he was selected as a liquidator, he may have to resort to some kind of war path, which is this is where it gets dangerous, because I don't think Macron really understands where this may take him. But the psychological profile of Macron is that this guy is cynicism beyond all imagination. He will do whatever he needs to do to remain in position to finish the job for which he was selected. And so he will invoke Article 16 and rule by decree, and elections will be suspended because we are at war. And what people should do is rally behind the president in times of war. But if he finds himself isolated in Europe, that's going to be difficult to sell to the French public.
Yeah.
So
Yep. And it's that peacekeeper troop deployment as part of the scenario to make that sort of happen. So a lot of this is the house of cards that could collapse at any gust of wind, could blow it over at any moment.
Right now, the closest ally to Macron, in as far as the current template, the one template we've been exposed to the last 3 years, is Keir Starmer. Well, I have no word for Keir Starmer, but he's inconsequential. But he also he's been in office not even 8 months, and he's already under so much criticism, so much pressure. But he's got what, 3-4 years to go. So
yeah. He's presiding over a party that expelled all of the leftists. So Labour is now devoid of any leftists. So Starmer's appeal is to really the establishment, to the City of London maybe, and to I don't know, a deep state and intelligence services, but not to the people. And that's that Macron, same problem, same situation.
So he and Macron have the same predicament. And that's no coincidence when we see how on November 6th, the day after Trump's election, they immediately got to work in trying to convince the Biden administration to authorize the use of long-range ATACMS missiles.
Yeah.
So those two are going to be, you have to keep an eye on those two.
Yeah, the Storm Shadow, Scalp, French, Anglo-French joint venture there, corporate venture. So I mean, they're up to their necks in terms of the provocations in Ukraine. So the U.S., the British, and the French, that's the real troika, if you will, for any potential conflict escalation with Russia. Has to happen with them. Also, UN Security Council members, also nuclear powers as well. So here we go. The table is set. So we'll see if they go for the meal or not. But definitely the table is set. Arnaud Develay, really enjoyed this conversation. Obviously, this is a great opportunity to get such wonderful background on Syria, on Middle Eastern politics, and also ending off here with Ukraine and Russia. I feel like we're probably going to have to continue this conversation at a future date. I hope you can join us again. This has been an absolutely wonderful discussion. Thank you so much for coming on the Sunday Wire this week.
My pleasure, Patrick.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is Arnaud Develay. He is an author. I'll also put the links to his book, Foreign Entanglements, in the show description as well. So for the moment, what we'll do now is we're going to take a break here with the Sunday Wire, and we'll be back in just a few moments. What we're going to do is a segment of Overdrive. I'm going to invite Hesher, host of the Boiler Room from Alternate Current Radio Network, and we're going to there's a controversy that's blown up in the last couple of days. It's with the tech bros, Elon Musk, Ramaswamy, butting heads with the MAGA right over this issue of foreign visas for tech workers from India, etc. So this kind of thing is coming apart at the seams, but there's some truths that have been revealed amongst this controversy. So we're going to be able to unpack that with Hesher in the Overdrive segment. So we'll take a break right now. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. Stay with us. Here's some music from our friend Joseph Arthur. We'll be right back.
Gratitude, the antidote. The world is built on fear. The evil world we live in wants our soul to disappear. But gratitude, salvation, and never ending light that transcends all the darkness trying to hold us to the night. Thoughts say what is missing, thank you says what's here. Thoughts keep us unconscious, thank you makes it clear. Back into the moment, the past eternal now, where God is always with us and hold it like a cow, like a sunrise or a child or a garden full of roses. The mind misses the magic and considers all the poses. Why our thoughts against us, principalities are there, whispering indifference on foundations of despair. So thank you is my mantra, mantra. Na 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 na. Thank you is my mantra, mantra. Who set up this funhouse, this journey for our soul, where most never make it and lose all their control? How do we get back any sovereignty from the lies of demons that we pretend to be? Thank you is a pass to a place outside of hell. Gratitude and presence will lift us where we fell, but we have to make a practice to come back into now, in the garden of our gratitude, and push that ancient plow. I don't know the reason we are in a holy war, how we ever come back to who we were before. Did it start in Eden with an apple and a snake? Since then, have we been falling with this battle as our fate? So thank you is my mantra, mantra. Na 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 na. Thank you is my mantra, mantra. The world will light up, and so will our minds. So will our minds. Whatever is the reason, this is where we are. The light and the darkness are aiming for our heart. The light wants us present in the clutch of gratitude. The darkness wants us scattered with an evil attitude. And we look at the thinking that justifies the course. We see it's thought itself that brings on the divorce. From the Holy Spirit, from revelations bloom, from the love of God to the darkness of the tomb. Voices of all demons we identify as us, and then we follow lies, the wrong voices that we trust. Take us to destruction, take us to despair, when the gift that God himself has always just been here. So thank you is my mantra, mantra. Na 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 na. Thank you is my mantra, mantra. Thank you is my mantra.